Okay, let's talk about the lifecycle management in Azure Blob Storage. Let's say that you have a millions of logs in Azure Storage, or your current application generates thousands of logs per day, which have been accumulated over a period of time. Just like the one that you saw on in my case, that I have a container which contains thousands of logs. Now, this is only a very small subset that I have prepared for this demo, but given the amount of data that I have having in this container is around 300,000 files, and the space that it's consuming right now is around 21 gigabytes. Okay, so that's an expensive trade in case if this is going to be accumulated over the period of time. So we need to figure out a way how we can solve this problem of a growing logs, which we may no longer be needed in the future in our future use cases. So having log files stored in the hot tier in Azure Blob Storage, just like the one that you see here, the access tier is hot, um, can be expensive because both the read and write operations or any modifications to these blob are the expensive operations when they are in the hot tier. So if there is a compliance or government policy that you have to adhere to, maintaining these logs for a longer period of time, then you should archive these logs by using the archive tier in the Azure storage, which will reduce the cost of storage as these log files will be rarely accessed by anyone. Now, the problem that I'm talking about is something very common, and I have been seeing people trying to solve it by creating a web job in Azure, or by running a time triggered function, or by doing it with the logic apps. The idea is to check multiple times during a 24-hour period window to identify which logs are older than X number of days and then delete them or move it to a different storage tier, and like so. Now, this approach, all these approaches works well, but they are expensive in all means. That is in terms of performance as well in terms of cost. So when you use web jobs, say for example, you are going to use the SDK and then try to list all the blobs as a first set of operations so that you can get the last modified date of the blob. And if the blob is older than a given number of days, then you can delete that particular blob. Now, this is not a good approach, as the app service plan where this web job is going to be running is that app service plan is going to have consume a lot of memory and then can slow down the performance of the web application hosted in that app service plan. So also the amount of blobs that can be deleted at any given point in time via web jobs or by Azure Function apps or by Logic apps is very less. And this applies to any other manual way that you try to do. Now in my case, to overcome this problem, when this functionality or this particular feature of lifecycle management was not available, I had a Logic app which I used to run every 15 minutes to get all the blobs which are residing in my container for more than 15 days, and then I would like to have them deleted. So I was having a Logic app to do that, and that Logic app takes around 10 minutes to delete approximately 10,000 blobs at any given point in time. So I have to run that particular Logic app multiple times during a day so that I can balance out the amount of logs that are being generated and the amount of logs that I have to delete and remove from the storage in order to cater the cost. So either of the three approaches are not useful when your use case may have thousands or maybe millions of blobs to be removed as they are no longer needed. Right? Just in my case, just as you can see, I have a lot of logs over here, and I showed you that I have around 300,000 files at this point in time, which is only a very small subset of the actual application that we are running in cloud in the production environment, which contains approximately more than, I think, somewhere around 1.5 million log files at any given point in time. And we have to ensure that we are not overshooting the budget of the storage as well, because we can just have these log files shooting in and we are not deleting the older files which are no longer needed by us. So we have to also ensure that we don't have this problem. Now, before we get into this, let's take a look at the cost that was incurred for us if we want to store somewhere around 21 GB of data into the hot tier. Okay, so here I have set up this Azure pricing calculator. You can see I set all the things, and then I have the access tier as hot, which will store up to, let's say, 20 GB of data, and the monthly cost will be $0.42. Okay, so If I move this to archive storage, you can see this cost has been significantly reduced to $0.02. Although the read operations from the archive will be expensive comparatively to the read operations happening on the hot tier, but that's okay because the data which is putting inside the archive tier making a business decision, ensuring that we are going to really access that data, and cost of moving the data from archive to hot for the accessibility for accessing that data, it's justifiable. Okay, so and then we have cool and cold storage as well, but you can see they are all cheaper comparatively to what the hot tier has to offer. So hot tier should be used only for the places where you want to access the data quite frequently, and archive should be used just as the name suggests, that you don't no longer needed that data, but for the compliance reason you have to support these log files till the end of the year, or maybe more than a year, or maybe for 5 years, whatever the compliance and government policies in your country states. So on the basis of that, we do this. Okay. In our use case, I just want to have them gone, right? I don't have any sort of a compliance. Anything on these log files loses their significance after 15 days of time, because then afterwards we don't really care about these log files. So what we needed is that we should just delete these files instead of moving them to any other storage. But in case you have an option or you have a requirement that you have to preserve these log files because they are of significant importance to you during the fiscal year or during some other governance policies, then you should definitely move them to a cheaper access tier where you can just retrieve them on request basis, and not just putting onto the hot tier where you have to incur a lot of money. So let's see how we can use the lifecycle management here, and how we can add a rule in order to make sure that we don't overshoot our budget and storage and delete the files which are no longer needed. So under data management, you will click on lifecycle management and you will prompt up with this blade where you can add a rule. Okay, so let's start up by clicking add a rule, and in here we can just first of all start up by giving a name to a rule. Let's say 15 delete. Okay, or any name that makes some sense to you. Okay, now the rule scope applies in two places. One, if you select the first option, then apply rule to all the blobs in your storage account. This means that this rule, whatever you're going to add up to, will be applicable to all the blobs given in your storage account, irrespective of which containers they are in. Okay, and in most of the cases, as you can see, this is the logs container over here. So we just want to confine ourselves within this container. But in most of the organizations, one storage account can have multiple containers and they can have multiple files which are of different significance. So you cannot apply this rule to the entire blob storage. So so you need to be careful about scoping this out. So definitely we don't want this. And in the real world also, I would really, really suggest you to take a relook in your storage account where you are applying this rule, or else you will be losing your files because you apply, or the rule scope is on the entire storage account and not on a very specific container. So we're going to add this to the limit blob filters like so. And as soon as you can see, as soon as I select this option, there is a third option enabled over here called filter set. This is a place where we are going to filter down the blobs or the containers. Now there are three types of blob. Over here you can see there are only two types: blobs and the append blobs. And a third type is the page blob. So if in case you have a page blob, say for example, and you want to delete those page blobs, specifically the page blobs are used when you have the virtual machines disks or the VHDs that you have added up as a backup or something like that, or the blob type is of a page blob type. So that is not supported at this point in time in the lifecycle management. Maybe they will add that feature in the future, but for now it's not available. And if you have a requirement where you want to remove the page blob files, then you might want to look for another options like running a function app that can take a look at all the page blobs retrieve them, take a look at their modification date or the created date, and based on that, they should remove it. Maybe you can write a PowerShell script or maybe a runbook, which is under the Azure automation to perform these operations. But for now, the lifecycle management doesn't support that. It will only support block blobs and append blobs. Now we have blob subtypes. Now because I am using the general purpose version 2 account of the storage account, I have the snapshots enabled for a given blob, and also the versioning for those blobs are also enabled. So I can select these two, and as you can see on the top, these options are also getting added. So for now, I will just have them enabled so that you can see what these snapshots and versions tabs has to offer to us. So with this, we have a rule name. We're going to limit the blobs with the filters so that we are confined to a given set of files or given set of containers. And the blobs will be selected because just like any other blob, we have this blob. Okay, so it's a generic type. Now we click on next. Now we have to set up the condition, like what is the condition which you want to adhere with. So base blobs were last modified 15 days ago. Okay, then delete the blob. That's my condition. But it could be possible that your condition might be different. You want to move this to an archive storage, so you can click on that, and then you can have them move to a different archive storage. Okay, they will change the access tier to be archive. Now, remember, there is no such thing called archive storage, which you will be thinking about that, okay, there might be a different container that will has different tier associated with it. It's not the case. You can see this access tier over here in this column, which says it is hot. Now you can change these access tiers by going so like this, change tier for this particular given file, and then you can have them set to archive. Okay, so as soon as you select this archive, click on save, this file will be went to the archive tier. So within that same container, you have different access tiers. Okay, these are not different storage, but just the same storage, but a different access tier associated for a given blob. Okay, so don't get confused because of that. Now our use case is very simple. We just want to get rid of these older files, but you can choose whatever your company or organization compliances are. You can adhere to those policies and choose whichever suits your needs and requirements. For me, I'm going to delete them. Now here I selected last modified date, ensuring that if the base is, base blobs haven't been modified in the last 15 days, then I want to delete them. I can also say if they ever were created, blobs created more than 15 days ago, then I want to delete them. I choose to prefer last modified so that this gives me a sense that, okay, this blob was not being used. It was not being accessed by any application or any developer or by any other external systems. So that means it is safe for me to delete this blob, which is no longer being used more than 15 days ago. Okay, so I want to clean up those blobs which are greater than 15 days and older than 15 days, ensuring that we have deleted all of them. In the next case, we also have the snapshots of the blobs. So if you are creating the snapshots, because in case if you delete them, then you can actually retrieve the different versions and snapshots of the blob so that you can have them restored. So these are the snapshots that has been taken. You can also set these up with the same value, like created on 15 days ago. But in this case, we have chosen to be added like any snapshots, because snapshots can be in incremental ways. So you can select it to be 15 days, or maybe you can have them so it's an only option over here, like created, so more than 15 days ago, and then you can click on next. Same can be applied to the versions that you also want to delete all the versions for that particular blob that is being there. Now we'll just go back and remove these options, because that's not what we want to do at this point in time. We just want to remove the base blobs. And in general, by the way, with a storage account which is specifically designed for storing these type of files, which has a short span of lifetime, then make sure that you don't enable these options when you create the storage account. In my use case, I have enabled these just to showcase you that these are the options also available to work with. But you should choose wisely when you work with a storage account. Now the last set is a filter set. Okay. Now here we have to define what files we want to consider when this rule is applied, or what container we want to refer to. Now in this case, we have a container called logs and we have a log file, which starts with some characters like 2. So I just want this container to be, uh, added to here. So, and not a specific file or a specific file type. So I'm going to say logs and then put a trailing slash in the end. So that will tell this rule engine that the entire container is now being monitored with this rule that this user is creating. Okay, so we have a now rule set, and then on this particular container, and then when this rule is going to get executed with this rule set, which states that base blobs haven't been modified in the last 15 days, just delete them within this container only. And if I fail to define any blob prefix over here, then this rule will be applied to all the objects in the storage account, which definitely you don't want. So this is very, very important step, and you should do it properly. You can also do a blob index matching if you have any. So you can do a key value pairing over here, and they can also match the blobs based on the index. And in the end, we just want to click on add, and that will add this rule. On the top, you can see a new or updated policy may take up to 48 hours to complete. So as soon as you have this rule enabled in your storage account for a specific container or for the entire storage account, it will not get executed just as soon as you have them enabled over here or created over here. Okay, it will take up to 48 hours for this rule to be warm up and start to work. And then from there onwards, it will continue to work. You can also enable or disable this rule. So this rule is enabled for now. We can have this rule disabled for some time and then have this enabled again when we want it. So, okay, so you can enable and disable as well. Now the last thing before we go is the enable access tracking. Okay, so this option will also incur certain cost to you, because when you enable this option and when you add a new rule, and let's add some random name and go to the next page, you can see it now has a third option, which is called last accessed. So I'm going to say in this case, if the last access is then more than 25 days, then delete the blob. Click on add. Okay, and if I go in here, and click on next, you can see if the base blobs haven't been accessed in the last 25 days, then delete the blob. Okay, so this is also one of the conditions that you can add. The only drawback with this condition though is that it incurred a cost, because the last accessed is enable access tracking, because you are going to enable the access tracking in your blob storage. This feature will then take a look at the read and writes, or the read or the writes of a given blob, and then map the last access time so that it can match with this particular condition. Okay, so there is a read feature, or there is a read operation happens when you enable this access tracking in your blob storages, in your blob storage, and all your blobs will then have a hit because of this service, because this service will then try to access each blob and get what is the last access date and time of a given blob. So that is an overhead, and hence it's actually going to cost you a little bit more when you enable this particular feature. So I will have this disabled. Okay, so we need to remove this. You can see you cannot disable this. So we can select this, we can have this deleted, and then we can have this removed. All right. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I think this is useful for the people who are struggling to get there and delete their blobs in an efficient way. This is the way you should definitely do this. If you are having any web jobs or function apps or logic app which is running behind the scenes and you're struggling to get the kind of a performance and cost effectiveness, then you should definitely drop those things out and switch to the lifecycle management that will help you to remove these blobs which are no longer needed, or to move these blobs to a different storage or different access tier that may reduce down your cost based on your conditions and based on your requirements. Okay, so I hope this is useful. If you have any questions, feel free to put them into the comments below. I will take a look, and if possible, I can make sure to get you the right approach and see where I can help you in any way possible. Okay. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.